Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the studio this evening. As you can see this evening, I am painting for you some blue pansies. There they are. To paint these blue pansies, I'm going to be using my Holbein paints. I've got them on the paint cam right over there. You can see my color card just at the top there. I'm going to be referring to that. Okay, so I'm getting started here with a little bit of Compose Blue. It's like a peacock blue, a little richer, a little warmer than a cerulean blue. I just think it's a nice base layer on these pansies. And it is just a little bit, just ever so slightly opaque. And I think if I put that down as a base layer and then don't go back to it too deeply, I think it'll be okay to use. But I'm just putting it on very light. The edges of these flowers are pretty light. I don't want to darken this up very much yet. Okay, but that's the paint I'm using. Again, that's the Holbein set of paints that I have. The brush that you see me using right there, the one I have in my hand is a number 2 Da Vinci Squirrel Hair Mop brush. Fantastic brush. You've probably seen me use it many times. And also in this video, I'm going to be using my silver black velvet brushes of various different sizes. And I use those when I need to do some detailed work, which we're going to end up getting to before the end of this. The paper that I'm using, excuse me, is fairly large. It's 12 by 16 sheet of paper. It is the Pro Art paper that you've seen me use before. It is wood pulp paper. And it's nice, it's decent paper. It's not the best paper in the world, but it is fairly good paper, and it works for what I'm doing. So as I'm just doing this, like I said, I'm just going to try to put a thin layer of paint down to start with, and then I'm going to go back and start building up some colors. Okay, I'm working in a little bit of ultramarine, a little bit of cerulean, trying to darken the shade up. And these flowers have kind of a darker oval around the outside. They're not an oval, but the far edges of these are a bit darker than kind of a ring in the center. And what I want to do is darken that up just a little bit. Here you go. You can see what I'm talking about in the reference photo, and you can see kind of where I'm going with this. Just on the outside, trying to darken that up a little bit to offset it from that bright ring in the center. Now, I did do a little bit of research on pansies because, to be honest, I wasn't really sure what pansies were, other than something I've seen at the Home Depot when I've gone to look at other flowers. And from what I can come up with, pansies are a class of flower that have 4 lobes, 3 of which kind of sit in the front, and 1 lobe of the petal, or 1 petal, sits behind the other 3. Oftentimes they have a central ring of color, or several rings of colors, or different colors. And that ring of color typically doesn't extend to that rear petal for whatever reason. I don't know why that is. It seems like a kind of a crazy design, a strange little design, but for whatever reason, that's how nature got these about. Oh, one other thing, the leaves, the greenery from all of the images I could find don't seem to be symmetrical. And so that's kind of one thing I thought was kind of interesting about these. Okay, so all I'm doing here is I'm trying to intensify the colors that we've got there. I'm using a little bit of that cerulean, ultramarine, maybe a little bit of cobalt in there to make a similar color to the composed blue, but a little bit darker. And I'm putting this on where either there is a shadow on the leaf, i.e. the petals in the back, that fourth petal in the back that's behind the other three, or anywhere else I think there's going to be a shadow on these. And then I'm just blending that out. I don't want to have a hard edge. And we're going to come back and go over this anyway. So this is just putting, I wouldn't say it's the base layer at this point, but just blocking out where I think there are going to be a few shadows here and there for later in this painting. And whether they get used later in this painting or whether they get painted over top of, well, I don't know. We'll find out that later on, but I want to put them in there now and see how they look before we get to the end of this. And I've got a few of these flowers to go. Just going to continue to put that on, and you see I'm still kind of working from that big same puddle of paint on my palette. There we go, just looking to see how I'm doing. I'm trying to warm the color up a little bit here. Still say similar to it, but a little bit warmer. And I'm going to go back and drop in a few different shadows here. Just, let's see. All right, and now I'm going to go and I'm going to continue with that little darker ring that's on these petals, with that nice darker mixture. And in essence, what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint everything except for that first layer. And that first layer is going to become that whitish, or it's not white, it's very light blue ring on these. So in the end, I'm going to have everything painted except for that first layer of paint. There we go. And just take that right out to the edge of those petals. And I did drop a little bit of Crimson Lake in there, just a touch. That's going to add just a little bit of warmth to the petal. I don't want it to be a strong color other than the blue, but I do want to vary that blue a little bit. So I think adding just that bit of warmth will help give a little bit extra life to those petals. And then I'm just going to repeat this on every other petal, or all the other petals, and I'm going to do it in kind of a pattern such that hopefully I don't have to do any two right next to each other, so that the colors run from one to another. And there you go, just adding again just a little bit of that red color to warm it up, to break up that stark blue. If I did it just all blue, then it could be a bit much, could be a bit strong, and we'd end up with a very large picture that is pretty one tone, and that's not really what I want to do. And the one issue I do face with this is, since this is wood pulp paper, once the color starts to bleed into a wet area, it wants to continue to bleed into that wet area until all of the paint there is at the same density. And so I've got to go back and continue to watch that and just be mindful of it. It's okay that it happens. I just want to be mindful of it And if I need to go back and take a little paint or a little bit of water off to dry an area up, that I want to be able to do that, so that I just don't end up with a large flat wash across these petals. All right, and like I said, I'm just going to continue to do this for all of the petals that we've got here. And just adding a little bit of warmth. I chose to add a little bit of red in here. As I look at my reference photo, it appears as though the blue that's on the outside of these petals isn't fully blue. There's a little bit of purplish in there. So that's why I actually chose this red. Yes, I did a little bit to kind of break the blue color up, but it was the red that I chose just to kind of give it that little bit of warmth like our reference photo has. There you go. That red that I put in actually happened to be a little bit of vermilion. Vermilion is the orangish red that you see at the top of the, I guess, second column of colors from the right hand side on my color palette. Vermilion is very orangey red, very nice, lovely color, but it's not a true red. And I've got quite a few of these petals to do. Here we go. And as you can see, I've already switched over to my silver black velvet brush. I believe the one that I'm using here is a size number 6. And I jump around with my brushes quite a bit depending upon what I want to paint. The smaller the area, the smaller the brush I want to get. So you may see me drop down a size brush or go up a size brush. But in this video anyways, if I've got a black brush in my hand, it is one of the silver black velvet brushes. There we go, just strengthening a little bit of that color. And being careful it doesn't bleed out too much. I do want a little bit of variation in color. As this bleeds out to the edge, it's going to add a little bit of interest to these petals as we go along. You can see me dip into a number of different colors there. I'm just trying to vary it a little bit. I did go back into the reds, my Crimson Lake. Maybe I touched the Rose Madder a little bit. I want to keep it a little bit on the warm side, but I don't want necessarily the blue to be exactly the same color blue as the petal next to it. I don't want it to be drastically different, but I don't want it to be exactly the same either. So I just vary it a little bit, try to vary that color just ever so slightly. Hopefully that's going to add a little bit of interest to your eye when you look at this painting at the end. I guess we'll have to wait to the end to find out about that. But in theory, it should help to do that. Okay, I'm just figuring which petals to paint. I'm going to pick this small one right here on the side. There it goes. Not much to this one really. Pretty small. And I can do his friend right on the other side. This one actually worked out pretty well, doing it for as quickly as it went. And right up above that, there we go. Now after we get the petals painted in this fashion, we've got to go back and do some veining and some texture work on them. But that's down the road a little bit. We do have some other colors to put into these, but that's what's coming up later in the video with these. There we go. That guy's going in there pretty good. And now I've got to figure out which petals I can paint that are adjacent to something dry. There doesn't seem to be anything, so I'm going to go into, that is what Holbein calls permanent yellow lemon. It's a very cold yellow color, very bright, very cold. And we're going to put that in the centers of these. There it is. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 of them. And maybe just touch to warm it up a little bit with permanent yellow deep, which is a much warmer color. I don't want it to be too warm. The permanent yellow deep on its own is a bit too orangish for me, so that's why I used the two different yellows there. All right, just finishing our petal on the smallest flower. There we go. And our last petal on our 5th flower. This one didn't quite seem to stay on the page as I drew it. I kind of started on the left-hand side and drew to the right, and didn't quite get everything on the page when I did that. Kind of a big mistake, I guess, but we'll make it work. All right. So, what I need to do now, or what I'm going to do now, is come back and re-strengthen those shadows that I had put in to start with. They've dried out a little bit, and they've faded. As they dry in color, they lighten. Not fade, they've lightened. So I'm going to re-strengthen those just a little bit. I'm using a little bit of mineral violet in here, again, to help give it a little bit of warmth. That blue that's in here is just, there's so much blue in here, it can be such a cold painting. And I didn't want it to be totally that cold, so along with the red that I put in a little bit of the petals, I'm hoping that a little bit of this mineral violet will help to warm this up just ever so slightly. And it appears to me that the last shadow I did was fairly large. Maybe that was a bit too big, but we'll go with it. Stuff happens. Here's this one going on. This one looks very nice. I like it very much. Just that little shadow seems to really help that petal, give it some depth. I'm moving my way from left to right across here. Just going to continue to drop in some shadows. And by dropping in the shadows, I'm not really hoping to gain anything on the 4th petal, the one in the back. What I'm really hoping to gain by putting on these shadows is that it's going to pop the front petals that much more to the front. Right, so what I'm hoping to do is just really, by giving it a dark shadow, that it's going to force the look of the petal in front to come off that page a little bit. And I hope that shows through. I'm not exactly certain that I've nailed it quite the way I wanted to, but I think it's working a little bit. All right, and everywhere I don't want the shadow, I'm just going to blend that all the way out. Just continue to blend that out. And that one worked. That shadow on the petal, the rear petal, really seemed to push the fore petal forward. If that made any sense. I think it made sense. Okay. Now, I'm looking at this and it's still looking pretty blue to me. This isn't necessarily in the original reference photo, but I want to add a little bit of color here, so I'm just dropping in a very light layer, and not even in every place on this flower, a little bit of yellow. There it goes. Just very light, and when it dries it's going to be even lighter than it looks now. But it's going to help to break up the blueness of this. There's a lot of blue in this painting. And I want to hit the highlights on some of these leaves that we have here. You see I've got them drawn on here. You knew I was going to get to them at some point. So I just want to touch on a little bit of this. This is a little bit of Terra Verte here, which is it's a bit of a transparent. I'm sorry, it's a bit of an opaque green, and I would liken it to maybe like a cactus color or so. It's not really an olive green. It's not really a khaki green. But it's not really a bright green. And I'm going to mix that with, depending upon how I see it, on this layer anyways, a little bit of permanent green number 1 or permanent green number 2. Holbein doesn't do the greatest job in naming their colors all the time. Permanent green number 1 is a little brighter, a little yellower than permanent green number 2, which is, of course, a little bit darker and maybe just a touch bluer. But I'm going to put those colors on a few of these while I'm waiting for my petals to dry. Okay, and now I'm dipping into some Prussian Blue, and this is really the reason why I used this Holbein set of paints. Because in here I've got this really rich dark blue, which is called Prussian Blue, that I don't have in my M-gram paints. And so what I want to do is use that for the centers of these pansies. And you can see what I'm doing is I have the number 4 silver black velvet brush, and I'm brushing on a partial disc of color, and then I'm using just this old rigger brush to pull out some lines and veins and creases inside each of these petals. And by doing that, I'm hoping to somewhat replicate the look of the pansies in our reference photo. And this can get pulled all the way through into that darker area, all the way through that light blue, because that's basically how it is in our reference photo. And there we go, I'm just pulling that out. Nothing to it. And with a little luck, that blue, that really dark blue, is going to help these flowers look as though they sink right there into the center of the flower. Right, like it goes deep in right there where all that dark color is. I don't need it to do that much, but any little bit would really help. There we go, just again with that rigor. This is a, you can see it's all old and cracked. I've had this rigger for a decade or more. It's a Grumbacher Academy rigger brush. I can't even tell what size it is anymore. It's probably a size 1 or size 2, but it's definitely seen better days. And again, just, whoops, just moving my paint off camera. There we go. Just putting in a partial disc of color and pulling out with it. And then I'll be able to do that on the rest of the petals. The main, what I would call the main petal, the biggest one, the one furthest in front. There we go, just pull that all the way out like that. I'm being a little careful here to pull out in enough areas so that it doesn't look like I've just painted a half a disc on there and there's a hard edge. I'm hoping that when I pull these out, right, I add a little randomness to the edge. This one didn't do it quite as much, so I'm going to use a little more pressure and hope to coax a little bit of that paint out so it's not such a stark edge there. Just touching up a little bit around. I've painted a really flat edge next to the yellow, and in reality it's not really a flat edge. Everywhere there's a crease or a vein, it goes back into that yellow just ever so slightly. So that's what I was doing. I was just tapping and putting in a few dots along the edge of that yellow. We're almost there with this one. Really quickly. We've got our last flower to do here. And just again, just pulling it out ever so. All right, so I did take a little bit of a break. And now I can, everything has dried. I can come back in and do a little bit on the petals. Not the petals, the leaves. Sorry, the green leaves there. And I'm using, again, a mixture of Terra Verte, permanent green, number 1 and 2, and where I think I need to add a bit of color to it, I'm going to mix in either a little bit of permanent yellow, which is what you see now, makes it a much more yellow, much warmer green. And later on, when I want to make a leaf that's further back in the stack, more in the shadows, I'm going to add in a little bit of Prussian Blue or a little bit of Cobalt Blue, and that'll really push that leaf back a bit. There we go. Got a couple of petals done there. This is a lot of yellow in that green. And I'm hoping to get a mixture of a little bit of warmer areas and maybe some cooler areas in these leaves, as well as get a little bit of depth to them with the color. Of course, the bluer, the green, the further in shadow, the further into the picture. the leaf should be, and the warmer or the lighter the green, it could be a whiter green, not just a lighter green or a yellower green, then the closer to our eyes that they should be. Okay, and while those dry a little bit, I'm just going to drop in a little bit of color here and there. I want to add a bit of texture to these leaves. I'm sorry, to the petals. And while I'm adding this bit of texture, I'm going to see if I can't put in the veining on these at the same time. So kind of where the veins or the lines from that dark blue come out, I'm going to continue those lines with a bit of cerulean, a cobalt blue, and just draw that out. You can see it there. And then with a light wash, I'll go back in and kind of mess that up a little bit. And hopefully we get just the hint of some veins on these petals. I don't want them to be too stark, but I want them to be there. So when I go back over and just rinse right over top of them almost with some very light wash, you can just barely see those. There you can see the veins and some water, just a touch of color over top of it, and take a bit of those away. They're just like that. Maybe I need a little bit more of the veins, maybe I need a little bit more of the blending here and there. But I'm going to gain a little bit in, by putting the veining on, I'm going to gain a little bit of shape, because the direction of those veins is going to draw your eyes and make your eyes believe that that petal is bent in whatever direction those veins are going. There we go. But I don't want them to be so strong that that's all that you see. So that's why I'm doing this. There we go. And if I've washed too much out, then I'll just go right back over it. Put another vein or two on there. A little bit of extra color. And voila. Well, that's not bad. I don't think that's great. I'm going to add, I've washed out a little too much on some of these, so I'm going to go back in and add just a few more of those veins in there. A little extra color. And now I can get back to doing the leaves on here, and I'm going to do the leaves in the same way that I did before. Those leaves that I think are a little closer to the top of the flower, of the bunch of flowers here, they're going to be a little lighter in color, maybe a little yellower. And the ones that are a little lower on the stalk will be a little bluer and maybe a little bit darker. There we go. You can see this one that I'm painting now is much darker in color than the surrounding ones. And as soon as I say that, then I've moved on to a whole different leaf. There we go. And this leaf, as I get closer to the flower, it's going to get a little bit darker because it's curved down that little bit. And anyways, this is an exercise of just a little bit of negative painting, you know, painting around an image with a darker you can see what the true shape of the shape on top is. And I'm going to do that all the way around. All right. Just going to continue to go with these leaves. As I'm painting these leaves, I'm going to take a minute to remind everybody I do have a website. It is watercolorswithmichael.com. Please feel free to go there and check it out. I've got a gallery of a lot of my works right there. I've got a blog that I update at least weekly with the things I have going on and what I'm thinking, what I'm doing, what's going on in the studio. You can join the mailing list. You can contribute to the coffee fund or the beer fund to help keep me going and painting in the studio, making some nice art for everybody. You can find a link there to my Amazon affiliates where you could purchase any of the products that I use in my videos if you do like those. There is a link there to my Etsy store where I've got several paintings for sale. Many of them that I really like. I've sold a few recently, which is very nice. I should say all of the funds from the Etsy store or the beer or coffee fund just go into the studio's general account to help me buy more supplies to help keep me painting or to help me do reviews that everybody seems to like so much. I am fairly active on Twitter and Instagram. If you do either of those, I post a lot of paintings on there that you don't see in videos or that won't come up other places. So you can find me on Twitter and Instagram, links down below, or of course on my website. They are there. I'm just dropping in a quick background on this one. I should say this is my Dana squirrel mop brush. And here's the finished painting, or nearly finished anyways. I'm going to put a little bit of veining on some of these leaves in there so they're not quite so stark. I just put my hand in some wet paint right there. I'm trying to fix that. Anyways, there you go. Here's a painting of Pansies. This is a viewer request. If I haven't mentioned that before, I hope you enjoyed it. I enjoyed bringing it to you. Until next time, thanks for stopping by the studio. We will see you later. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.